Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Dragon Prince Yuan Season 2 episode number 7 based on novel. So let's start. While the countless prided geniuses of the Kangmang continent flooded into the Saint Remains domain, no one knew that something important was happening in a certain far-off continent. On this particular continent, dazzling light was currently exploding from a mountain top. One would see that an enormous Genesis rune boundary had been inscribed into the ground. Astonishing undulations pulsed from it, gathering all of the surrounding Genesis chi. At this current time, 5 figures stood at the center of this gigantic Genesis rune boundary. Several figures stood in the air outside the giant Genesis rune boundary. Extremely powerful Genesis chi rippled from their bodies as terrifying pressures suffocated the area. Outside the Genesis rune boundary, a stern elder said in a low voice, "Yi Ming, the Saint Remains domain in the Kangmang continent has already been opened, and we will soon start up the teleportation Genesis rune to send the 5 of you in. The 5 of you are the most elite prided geniuses of our Dongxian continent, and your task will be to snatch away the greatest gift of the Saint Remains domain. If you succeed, your futures will definitely be limitless." Another old granny in black said, "The Kangmang continent is a chaotic mess in comparison to our Dongxian continent that it controlled by us, the 5 great clans. While the 5 of you are the most elite prided geniuses that the 5 great clans have spared no effort in nurturing. Therefore, you absolutely cannot lose to the geniuses from the Kangmang continent." One of the 5 individuals inside the Genesis rune boundary scratched the back of his head, displaying an innocent smile as he asked, "Although there are no powerful factions in the Kangmang continent, the envoys from the 6 sacred sects will be there. Will they make things difficult for us if we're found out?" The stern elder answered in an indifferent tone, "The gifts and blessings of the world do not belong to any one person. If the geniuses of the Kangmang continent are incapable of securing the gifts offered them, it will naturally be passed on to those with ability. That's why the 6 sacred sect envoys will not say anything even if they find out. As long as you succeed, you will also naturally be able to enter the 6 sacred sects." In the Genesis rune boundary, a tall and slender girl waved her hand and nonchalantly said, "Relax, it's just a mere Kangmang continent. We've already familiarized ourselves with their top geniuses, and they won't be much of a problem." The granny in black looked towards the center of the group where a young man in black robes stood. "Yi Ming, you will serve as the leader on this mission, and everyone else will listen to your orders." The eyes of the youth in black robes had been lightly shut since the beginning, only slowly opening after hearing the granny's words. Black pupils that seemed to contain pure darkness, a sight that was incomparably strange. He did not reply the granny, but instead looked towards the other 4 prided geniuses with those pitch-black eyes, as he said in a detached manner, "Regardless of whether it is the geniuses of the Kangmang continent, or you guys, whoever obstructs me will be killed." His tone was as ordinary as could be, containing neither emotion nor killing intent. When he spoke, however, the other 4 elite geniuses of the Dongxian continent shivered and unexpectedly did not retort. Upon seeing that no one had anything to say, the youth in black robes lifted his head, looked outside of the Genesis rune boundary and nonchalantly said, "Let's begin." The stern elder and the other 4 nodded. With a wave of their sleeves, vigorous Genesis chi whizzed out and poured into the Genesis rune boundary. It immediately began to shake as space started to twist and distort. While the space around them distorted, the 5 figures within the Genesis rune gradually faded away. With one final burst of light, their figures completely disappeared. Upon seeing the 5 figures vanish, the stern elder and his group finally breathed a sigh of relief. The Kangmang continent is nothing special, yet they possess a Saint Remains domain. We can't be blamed for having designs on it. Ha ha, relax. Yi Ming and the other 4 are the most outstanding younger generation talents of our 5 clans. With them in play, what can the geniuses of a tiny Kangmang continent possibly amount to? Yes, there will be no obstructions this time. As long as they manage to obtain the greatest gift, an expert that can open a law domain might appear in our 5 clans. When that happens, we may even end up establishing our own sect and become a true behemoth-like existence in Sangshuan heaven. What appeared before Ju Yuan was an endless ancient land. Ancient trees that reached into the sky, giant mountains that seemed to pierce the clouds. The entire land was filled with an ancient and barbaric aura. When one looked towards the sky, one would no longer see the swirling mist, but instead a dim yellow hue that was clearly different from the outside world. "I'm afraid that this Saint Remains domain exists in a different space," mumbled Ju Yuan to himself. This Saint Remain's domain may perhaps be a tiny corner of the Kangman continent, but the land reflected his eyes was extremely vast. If one really had to compare, it may even be larger than the entire Kangman continent. To think a drop of blood from a saint would become such a mystical land. Zhu Yuan sighed. He truly wondered how strong the so-called saint was that a single drop of blood could transform into a world of its own. I seem to be separated from Yao Yao and the rest. Zhu Yuan scanned his surroundings, finding it completely empty and without a single soul in sight. It was more than obvious that Yao Yao and the rest were not here. Looks like I'll have to get going alone. Zhu Yuan shook his head. He was not worried about Yao Yao. Although she was unable to use Genesis Chi, her spirit cultivation was outrageously amazing. Only a handful of prided geniuses from the Kangman continent would be able to threaten her. Zhu Yuan did not hesitate for long, randomly choosing a direction as Genesis Chi began to rise around him. With a stamp of his foot, his body shot forward. After traveling at full speed for about a dozen minutes, Zhu Yuan's eyes suddenly focused. A lake had appeared some distance to his front. Zhu Yuan concentrated, his expression involuntarily changing a split second later. He had discovered a figure standing by the lakeside. Golden robes and a dignified aura. Everything about the figure was just too familiar. It was Wu Huang. As the saying went, it was inevitable for enemies to meet. So many people had been scattered, but he just had to encounter Wu Huang. When Zhu Yuan discovered Wu Huang, the latter also seemed to sense something. He turned his head, his gaze instantly finding Zhu Yuan, causing him to be momentarily stunned. However, Wu Huang swiftly regained his wits, and could not help but break out into a soft laughter that gradually grew louder and louder. After laughing for some time, he finally stopped, staring at Zhu Yuan as he said, "Do you know what I was thinking about just now? I was thinking about where should I go to find you, the crippled dragon of the Zhu clan, so I can finally eliminate any potential threat you might become. And just as this problem was beginning to vex me, you decided to appear. Do you know what this means? It means I possess the true blessings. Whatever I wish for will naturally become reality." Wu Huang stared at Zhu Yuan, a toying look in his eyes as if he was looking at prey that could not escape the palm of his hand. "Crippled dragon of the Zhu clan, that is why I am the true dragon. With no one to protect you this time, how will a crippled dragon like you flail about before your inevitable doom?" In front of the lake, Zhu Yuan's expression had turned rather grave, as he gazed upon the toying look on Wu Huang's face. Meeting Wu Huang here was definitely not part of his plans. This was really quite unlucky. After all, the current Zhu Yuan was completely outclassed. Hence, Zhu Yuan's gaze flickered slightly for an instant, before Genesis Chi suddenly exploded below his feet. Not even a shred of hesitation could be seen as his figure turned and fled. The only thing to do in this situation was run. Can you really escape? However, Wu Huang merely smiled faintly in response to Zhu Yuan's decisive choice to escape, a smile that contained a faint hint of mockery. His foot slammed into the ground as vigorous scarlet-red Genesis Chi erupted from within his body. Unbearable heat pulsed, making the lake waters boil as the ground rapidly cracked. Wu Huang's figure abruptly shot forth. In the mere span of a few breaths, he had appeared directly behind Zhu Yuan, a scarlet-red hand swatting downwards at the latter with power so great that the ground below to fissure. Dragon step. Zhu Yuan did not dare to be even a split second late, and hurriedly performed dragon step. His figure turned somewhat blurry as the hand descended, causing the attack to brush past his body. Bang! The ground split apart, while Zhu Yuan borrowed the force to propel himself even further away. Though his attack had missed, Wu Huang was unaffected, neither hurried nor slow as his figure continued to closely give chase. The smile on his face was akin to a cat toying with a mouse as he sent a hand swatting towards Zhu Yuan from time to time, making the latter cut an extremely sorry figure. In a short few minutes, Zhu Yuan had seen his life flash past his eyes multiple times, after nearly taking several direct hits from Wu Huang. He was also clearly growing rather weary as the chase dragged on. What a pitiful crippled dragon. Wu Huang walked towards Zhu Yuan with his hands behind his back, his face full of compassion as he said, "But don't worry, after killing you, I will destroy the great Zhu Empire, so that your family can keep you company." Boom. However, the moment he neared Zhu Yuan, the wearings on the latter's face abruptly disappeared, replaced by an icy coldness. With a stamp, Zhu Yuan no longer tried to flee, but instead charged at Wu Huang like a bolt of lightning. Dragon tablet hand, break the sky. His hand was swung, Genesis Chi rumbling as the air in front of it was rapidly blasted away. Grade 3 Genesis Rune, Black Gold Hand Rune. In conjunction with using the strongest move in his arsenal, a light rune appeared on Zhu Yuan's palm. A black gold radiance emerged, amplifying the destructive power of the attack and the hardness of the hand. An astonishing amount of power exploded in a split second. A hand containing all the power Zhu Yuan could muster powerfully swung towards Wu Huang. Wu Huang's eyes narrowed slightly, his 5 fingers clenching into a fist as he punched. A deep sound rang out as the ground below the two cracked open. Zhu Yuan's body was flung backwards, his feet leaving deep grooves on the ground. Wu Huang's sleeves had been torn open, the force making him take a dozen steps back. His expression became extremely ominous at this moment, killing intent flaring as he stared at Zhu Yuan. So even a cornered rabbit can bite back. But you've now truly angered me. Powerful scarlet red Genesis Chi flooded out from the top of Wu Huang's head like a tsunami, as an extremely domineering heat spread. It was clear that he no longer planned to play the role of a cat toying with a mouse. He was now out to kill. Zhu Yuan's expression grew increasingly grave. He rubbed the silver ring on his finger, as a grim coldness flashed in his eyes. If there was really no other choice, he would have to use Silver Shadow. The current him was already at the advanced illusory stage, and would surely be able to quickly escape Wu Huang by borrowing Silver Shadow's power. The only uncertainty was how long he would be unconscious after using Silver Shadow. It was extremely risky. There was no one around to protect him, and he was in the Saint Remains domain that was filled with unknown dangers. But it would at the very least be better than dying at Wu Huang's hands. Wu Huang's body slowly rose into the air, standing on Genesis Chi, as he looked down from above at Zhu Yuan, and indifferently said, "I should really let Wu Yao see your miserable appearance. I believe she will no longer have any doubts about the fact that I am the true dragon, don't you agree?" He shook his head, deciding that he would not waste any more time. His hands slapped together, and scarlet-red Genesis Chi roared out, like a river of magma filled with overwhelming destructive force that flowed towards Zhu Yuan. Space warped and twisted wherever the scarlet-red flood passed. Scarlet-red filled Zhu Yuan's vision. He took in a deep breath, as a resolute look flitted across his eyes. With a pat of his universe bag, a silver ball appeared in his hand. However, right before Zhu Yuan was about to activate Silver Shadow, a peculiar sound suddenly rang out across the area, a sound that seemed similar to the cry of a sword. The flood of red descended, but it was at this very moment that a black shadow suddenly zoomed over from behind at a shocking speed. A sharp aura burst forth, cutting deep wounds on the ground. The black shadow met the scarlet-red flood, the berserk aftershocks from their clash tearing up the surrounding ground. As the dust gradually settled, Zhu Yuan was stunned to see a thick tipless black broadsword standing in front of him. Sharp sword chi pulsed from the sword as it trembled. Wu Huang's expression sunk when he saw the black broadsword and icily shouted, "Blind sword Li Chunjun. Why are you being a busybody? Blind sword." Zhu Yuan's heart shook as he turned his head, only to see a figure in black slowly approaching. The figure's footsteps were not quick, but in a mere few breaths, he had already arrived in front of Zhu Yuan, standing behind the black broadsword. He raised his head, his black cloth-covered eyes looking towards Wu Huang as he placed both hands on the sword grip, and said in a hoarse voice, "I owe him a meal debt." Wu Huang's gaze darkened as the scarlet-red Genesis Chi around him began to churn, clearly now enraged. The black-clothed youth called Li Chunjun tilted his head slightly and said to Zhu Yuan, "Go, I will stop him." The silver ball in Zhu Yuan's hand returned to his universe bag. He looked at Li Chunjun in silence for some time, before he said, "Thank you." Although he still had his final trump card, it was naturally best to avoid using it. Li Chunjun shook his head. "I'm merely repaying the roast meat debt." Zhu Yuan grinned. "Don't kill him. I intend to personally end him." Lu Chunjun was taken aback, evidently surprised by Zhu Yuan's charisma. The former could feel that the latter was trying to act tough, but was truly serious about it. For the first time, a faint smile appeared on his stiff face. "Don't worry, the current me cannot kill him." Zhu Yuan chuckled and nodded, before raising his head as he looked towards the stormer-face Wu Huang and said, "Such a great opportunity, and yet you've still failed to kill me. What do you think this means?" "It means that your blessing is a fake." Zhu Yuan let out a hearty laugh, paying no further notice to Wu Huang, whose face had grown so stormy that it was about to break into a downpour. There was no hesitation, as Zhu Yuan turned around and transformed into a flash of light that rapidly disappeared into the horizon. A voice seemed to echo from far away. Wu Huang, make sure to take good care of your head, so I can take it the next time we meet. By a stream deep within a mountain. Zhu Yuan squatted by the stream as he drank 2 mouthfuls of water. It had been half a day since he encountered Wu Huang. The former had most of the time traveling at full speed, without stopping for a single break. It was difficult for even Zhu Yuan to manage such a high pace. But I should now be free of him. Zhu Yuan wiped away the water at the corner of his mouth, his eyes narrowing slightly as a fierce look flitted across them. He did not feel that running away from Wu Huang was humiliating. The latter's strength far surpassed his own, a lead that had arisen due to various reasons. What he needed to do now was to shrink that gap with all his might, not fight to the death while knowing that he was clearly outclassed, because that was not bravery, but foolishness. One's path cannot be smooth sailing forever, and there were times when it was essential to patiently bear with the situation. This was not weakness, but similar to a spring, shrinking back not due to fear, but in preparation for the moment when one would let loose the strongest blow. The vast Saint Remains domain was filled with opportunities, and this was where Zhu Yuan's chance lay. He needed to grasp some of these opportunities, and strengthen himself till he reached the level that allowed him to oppose Wu Huang. When that time finally came, Zhu Yuan would naturally no longer harbor even the tiniest thought of retreating. I wonder how Yao Yao and the rest are doing. Zhu Yuan stood up and swept his gaze about his surroundings. The Saint Remains domain was just too huge, and he did not know how to find them. While scanning the area, his eyes suddenly froze. He had seen a giant black beast walk out of the forests to his front, its beady beast eyes tightly glued to him. The giant black beast looked like a lion, but a flame burned on its tail. Fire also raged within its enormous mouth. Mid-heaven gate strength. Zhu Yuan was a little amazed by the sight of the black lion. It was likely a Genesis beast of the Saint Remains domain and was pretty strong too. It seems that I've been categorized as prey again. Zhu Yuan chuckled as his hand reached towards his waist and pulled out the heavenly Yuan brush. The brush swiftly expanded, its snow-white hairs twisting into a sharp spear tip. He raised the tip of the brush and pointed at the blazing black lion. After being forced to flee for so long, I'll be more than happy to use you as an outlet for my frustration. Roar! The blazing black lion roared in response to Zhu Yuan's provocation. In a flash, it transformed into a blur of black as it dashed forward, its sharp claws tearing through the air, viciously slashing at Zhu Yuan. Dark gold Genesis chi exploded from Zhu Yuan's body as the heavenly Yuan brush shivered slightly. Deep green light gathered at its tip, revealing an incomparable sharpness. Aura flare technique. Zhu Yuan's toes pushed off the ground as his body abruptly rocketed forward, and the two figures crossed above the stream. The blazing black lion's sharp claws slashed at Zhu Yuan's shoulder, but instead of blood, all it could draw was sparks from the green scales that had appeared on his skin. While the blazing black lion's claws scraped across Zhu Yuan's shoulders, the brush tip that pulsed with a green aura pierced the former's throat. Fresh blood spurted out like a fountain. Zhu Yuan and the blazing black lion had exchanged places, but the latter's enormous body soon crashed to the ground with a loud thud. Zhu Yuan turned around and looked at the fallen blazing black lion, only to be stunned. He had just caught sight of a wisp of faint white chi rise from its corpse. A string of white surged towards Zhu Yuan, splitting into two. One half homing in on Zhu Yuan, while the other swam towards the heavenly Yuan brush in his hand. Zhu Yuan cautiously observed the strands of white chi. His spirit senses reached out, but did not detect any danger. Instead, he could feel extremely pure Genesis chi contained within them. It was even purer than the Genesis chi here. What's going on? Confusion colored Zhu Yuan's eyes. He hesitated for a few moments, before very carefully absorbing the strand of pure Genesis chi. Once it entered his body, it flowed through his 8 meridian channels, before ultimately arriving in his chi dwelling where it was subsequently transformed into a sliver of oming python chi. This process was smooth, without a single hiccup occurring. So smooth that it was even more effortless than his usual training. In addition, it was also more effective. The gains from that single strand from earlier was approximately equal nearly 2 hours of training. Zhu Yuan mumbled to himself, why do the Genesis beasts in the Saint Remains domain possess such pure Genesis chi? His gaze flickered in thought. It was a long time later before he arrived at a conclusion. The Saint Remains domain originated from a saint's blood, and the same is likely true for these Genesis beasts within it. That's why their bodies contain extremely pure Genesis chi that probably originated from the fallen saint. Only then does it explain how such a tiny sliver can have such a huge effect on my cultivation. Zhu Yuan's eyes grew increasingly bright. If this conjecture was true, hunting Genesis beasts in the saint remains domain would be an extremely effective training method. In addition, he lowered his head and looked at the heavenly Yuan brush in his hand. After absorbing the strand of Genesis chi from earlier, the third ancient rune on its mottled body had become a little brighter. The absorption of the white chi was clearly extremely beneficial to the heavenly Yuan brush. At this rate, it would not be long before the third rune of the brush was awakened, and there was a high chance that it would reach the high-grade black tier level. Most importantly, every awakened rune would bestow a new ability unto the brush, an ability that would surely become a powerful support to Zhu Yuan. For the sake of gaining the power to contend against Wu Huang, the current Zhu Yuan needed to raise his battle power from every avenue possible. As expected of the saint remains domain, Zhu Yuan sighed as his gaze gradually filled with excitement and anticipation. He knew that this information would soon be known by all of the prided geniuses that had entered. When that happened, the competition would become much fiercer. I've got to take advantage of this time to act. Zhu Yuan tightly gripped the heavenly Yuan brush and looked towards the mountains before him, from which the faint cries of beasts could be heard. No longer hesitating, his figure moved, transforming into a shadow that charged straight in. Zhu Yuan's entry broke the peace of the mountain. Majority of the Genesis beasts here had the strength of grade 3, and were comparable to the Heaven Gate stage, making them very appropriate opponents for someone of his level. It only took a day for Zhu Yuan to reach the deeper parts of the mountain, where he finally encountered some resistance. In the depths of the mountain, Zhu Yuan's eyes fell upon the over 10 feet tall golden ape before him as it released a deafening roar. At this moment, however, there was an extremely strange look in his gaze as he stared at the creature. The latter's strength had reached the peak of grade 3, and was comparable to an advanced Heaven Gate practitioner. But what made Zhu Yuan puzzled was not the golden ape's strength, but the fact that it actually knew a Genesis technique. The last Genesis beast he had seen using one was Tunton. But Tunton was an extraordinary existence. Could it be? Did this golden ape possess a special bloodline like Tunton? Deep in the mountains, a golden ape roared as it hammered its chest, creating a thunderous din. Berserk Genesis chi exploded from its body, shaking the surrounding space. Its eyes fell upon Zhu Yuan as it suddenly shot forward with a sudden stamp of its foot. It appeared above Zhu Yuan in an instant, giant fists hammering downwards with power so wild that even cracks began to appear on the ground below. Zhu Yuan did not dare to be negligent in the face of the golden ape's incoming attack. The big guy's strength had reached the advanced Heaven Gate stage, plus it had a strong physical body, traits that made it a pretty tough opponent. Dragon tablet hand, break the sky. Zhu Yuan's hand was swung, heavy as can be. The howling palm winds that accompanied it blasting away the air. This attack of his was similarly ferocious to the extreme. Boom. The two forces collided in the most violent manner. Berserk Genesis chi shockwaves immediately unfurled upon impact, causing cracks to extend along the ground, while towering tree after tree was snapped at their waist. Countless falling leaves were instantly turned to dust. Roar. The golden ape's titanic body jerked, before being sent flying backwards, crashing into a cliff wall as it let out a painful yelp. Zhu Yuan's body was also forced a dozen steps back, but what made his face turn a little grave, however, was the strange force contained within the Genesis chi of the golden ape's attack that had stealthily exploded when they came into contact. He had suffered when they clashed earlier, the stealthy explosion making the chi and blood in his body churn. The force should be from some kind of Genesis technique. There was amazement in Zhu Yuan's eyes. He could sense that the reason why a mysterious force was hidden within the golden ape's attack was because it knew a particular Genesis technique. Interesting. Zhu Yuan laughed as his body rocketed forward. The heavenly Yuan brush in his hand turning into numerous after images that filled the sky and began to engulf the golden ape. The images descended, piercing the golden ape's defenses, carving bloody scar after scar on its giant body. Roar. The golden ape roared madly, and suddenly slammed its heavy fists into the ground. A wave of Genesis chi immediately unfurled, shattering all of the brush images. Zhu Yuan's body drifted backwards. He looked at the now crazed ape as he suddenly extended a finger and lightly pointed. The golden ape's body abruptly froze. Soon after, it wailed. One could only watch as glowing snow-white hairs suddenly shot out of its body. The interior of its body had been completely destroyed by the invading hairs, instantly wiping out its life force. Heavenly Yuan brush, erode. The brush tip shook as the hairs returned like birds to the woods. A Genesis beast like this was blessed with raw physical strength, but it lacked intelligence. This was why it had been unable to sense the invasion of the hairs. As the golden ape died, a thick stream of white rose from its body. The mist parted into two like before, pouring into Zhu Yuan and the heavenly Yuan brush. A smile emerged on Zhu Yuan's face, as he felt the increasingly bountiful Genesis Qi in his Qi dwelling. Zhu Yuan mumbled to himself, I am already at the peak of the advanced Qi nourishing stage. Only a single step separates me from the Heaven Gate stage. While Zhu Yuan was delighted by the steady rise in his strength, he suddenly discovered that besides the stream of white Qi, a glowing ball had also risen from the golden ape's corpse. Zhu Yuan quickly walked forward while staring at the glowing ball, only to realize that it was a jade strip. Astonishment filled his face as he carefully grabbed the jade tile. The moment he did so, a surge of information instantly rushed into his head. Mid-grade black tier Genesis technique, Yuan explosive force. An explosive force can be melded into one's Genesis Qi attacks, amplifying its power. Zhu Yuan was stupefied. He finally understood. The explosive force contained within the golden ape's Genesis Qi from earlier had originated from this technique, Yuan explosive force. How can a Genesis beast learn a Genesis technique? And the Genesis technique it knows can even become a jade strip after its death. Zhu Yuan was dumbfounded for a long time, eventually shaking his head with a bitter smile. The reason behind all of this was likely somehow related to the Saint Remains domain. This place was created from the blood of a saint, and that same blood contained the various Genesis techniques he had mastered over his lifetime. The Genesis beasts here had likely inherited these Genesis techniques at birth. After killing these Genesis beasts, the techniques they knew would emerge in the form of a jade tile. A rush of excitement bubbled in Zhu Yuan's heart. He may not know what level a saint was at, but it was clearly an unimaginable existence. The Genesis techniques in the arsenal of such an existence was absolutely not limited to mere black tier ones. There were likely little heaven tier, and even true heaven tier Genesis techniques. Which means, there may be Genesis beasts that possess little heaven tier, or even heaven tier Genesis techniques in the Saint Remains domain. A burning radiance blossomed in Zhu Yuan's eyes. At the Saint Remains city auction, a little heaven Genesis technique had been sold at an astronomical price of several million Genesis crystals. Zhu Yuan may not be able to afford it back then, but he now had the chance to obtain something similar here. He would be able to obtain one as long as he could find and kill a Genesis beast that knew a little heaven Genesis technique. However, Zhu Yuan estimated that given a Genesis beast with a mid-grade black tier Genesis technique was already comparable to the advanced Heaven Gate stage, a Genesis beast that knew a little heaven tier technique would very likely reach grade 4, an existence comparable to the Alpha origin. One would likely need a meticulous plan to kill such a Genesis beast. Zhu Yuan tossed and caught the jade tile as he said to himself, although this Yuan explosive force technique is only at the mid-grade black tier, it can amplify the power of my Genesis Qi, so I should probably learn it. Although its level was not that high, a Genesis technique like this that could amplify the power of one's Genesis Qi was definitely not cheap. According to Zhu Yuan's estimate, even high-grade black tier attack-type Genesis techniques would not be more expensive than it. Oh? Zhu Yuan's gaze suddenly turned towards the heavenly Yuan brush in his hand. The brush that had fallen silent after absorbing the white Qi from the golden ape earlier had suddenly began to shake. Light began to blossom on its mottled body. Zhu Yuan watched in surprise as the dim third rune on the brush began to brighten bit by bit. The third Genesis rune was awakening. Joy flooded out in Zhu Yuan's eyes. What he currently needed the most was to raise his battle power, and the awakening of this third rune would undoubtedly be akin to giving wings to a tiger. I wonder what power the third rune possess. Zhu Yuan curiously reached out and gently touched the ancient third rune. At the moment of contact, information quietly flowed into his head. Heavenly Yuan brush, third rune, myriad transformations. This video will end here.